Canada is a country with a rich and complex history, yet there are many aspects of that history that are unknown or overlooked. From the indigenous people who have lived on this land for thousands of years, to the early European explorers and settlers, to the many diverse communities that have shaped this country in the modern era, there are many stories and perspectives that have been marginalized or forgotten over time. In this essay, we will explore some of the unknown history of Canada and consider the importance of acknowledging and learning from these stories. One of the most significant and tragic stories of Canada's history is the legacy of residential schools. For over a century, the Canadian government and various Christian churches operated boarding schools for Indigenous children with the goal of assimilating them into European Canadian culture. Children were forcibly removed from their families and communities, often subjected to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and forbidden from speaking their own languages or practicing their own traditions. This system, which was only fully dismantled in the 1990s, has had devastating effects on generations of Indigenous people and their families, including intergenerational trauma, loss of language and culture, and disconnection from their traditional lands. Another important but lesser-known aspect of Canadian history is the history of Asian immigration and exclusion. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Canada passed a series of discriminatory laws and policies that restricted Asian immigration, including the infamous Chinese head tax and the Exclusion Act, which banned most Chinese immigrants from entering the country. These policies were rooted in racism and xenophobia and had a lasting impact on the Asian communities that were affected by them. Despite these obstacles, Asian Canadians have made significant contributions to Canada's economy, culture, and society, and their stories deserve to be recognized and celebrated. There are also many stories of individual and community resistance that have been overlooked in Canadian history. For example, the Black community in Nova Scotia has a long and rich history of resistance and resilience in the face of racism and oppression. Despite being subject to discriminatory laws and practices, Black Nova Scotians have fought for their rights and worked to build strong communities that celebrate their culture and heritage. Similarly, many Indigenous communities have maintained their traditions and resisted assimilation despite the trauma and challenges of residential schools and other forms of colonialism. In conclusion, the unknown history of Canada is complex, diverse, and often painful. But it is essential that we acknowledge and learn from these stories if we are to build a more just and equitable society. By recognizing the experiences and perspectives of marginalized communities, we can better understand the complexities of Canadian history and work towards a more inclusive and respectful future. Whether through education, dialogue, or action, we all have a role to play in acknowledging and addressing the unknown histories of our country.